Yeah, so guys, just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity and thank you for joining us. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. But yeah, no, thanks for having me, Stefan.
Excellent.
Cool.
Yeah, let me jump in. So these are some of the features we're going to talk about, from the measure codes to the background maps, to the snapping features, limit box mode, the artificial sort of AR ready stuff, and the apps and so forth. So let's go for it. First of all, this is just to show the premium apps that are available. So you will need to pay extra for these apps, and some of them, some of them are designed by customers or industries which really hones in on the workflow specific to those. For example, the Powerline app, the monitoring app, and so forth. And these apps are possible because Trimble released the SDK to users, which is also available to any of you should you be that way inclined. All right, and then if we look at a very cool feature which I used a lot in the field was the measure codes. And I know our sales consultant for the Eastern Coastal region, Daniel, that's also on the line, he loves this feature and promotes it a lot. And basically it's like your hot dial or your speed dial on the phone. You just push the button or the corresponding number on the keyboard and it'll store a point with that code. But what's more is you can program these codes to join lines in the field, so you can already do most of your CAD work or the important CAD work in the field. And with the new Trimble Access, you can now make different groups. So you could have a group for the road cross-section, you could have a group for embankments, and so forth. So group management is now much easier on the big screen. So if you can see here, you can even choose the size of the groups in terms of your layout. And on the next screen, yes, Gustav.
Yeah, if I can just quickly just jump in there. With these groups, what's nice about it is that you can create a group depending on the type of survey work that you're going to do. So let's say, for instance, if you're focusing on utilities, you can now create a group called utilities, and then you can go and create codes like lampposts, let's say water lines or valves or whatever the case might be. You can now go and you can create codes for this. And then as you can see here on the current screen is that you've got your icons here that you've selected here, a 3x3 grid. You can now go and either press the number on your key or you can actually now type or select with your stylus, click on the code and then use that to actually now measure your points. So it speeds up the process quite drastically. So yeah, that's
brilliant. Yeah, nice. And if you look on the next screen, this is kind of what you're doing in the field, is you're actually building your CAD work up in the field. So these lines and these points you see, this is not a background map that you imported. This is the CAD lines actually being drawn up in the field. You can see that they've selected on the last point they measured there, bottom of curb, and it would automatically join up the CAD line to the previous bottom of curb code. Yeah. And you can then download this as a DXF and import it into your CAD software.
What is just important here is that you need to create a feature code library, basically giving line control where you need to specify where it needs to start and where it needs to end the lines. So if you've got a specific code, maybe in this specific example, let's say it was curbs, what you'll do now, you'll create a line control code, which is basically, let's say, ST for start, and then your curb, let's say top curb or whatever the case might be, you'll now go around and you'll measure it according, or what's actually happening in the field, and the CAD line will be drawn in. But ultimately, a feature like this, as you can see here, the current group was called road structures. So you can now go and select the code of choice to now speed up your data capturing, the way that you capture data, and ultimately also already start with your CAD work. The nice thing is it's building up in real time, so you can already see in the field how it's going to look like. Also, another thing that I also just want to make mention of is that you can create a template, and the template is basically if you following the same data capturing process. Let's say you basically now measure across a road surface. You can now create a template stating with the sequence already pre-configured. So basically, if you start from left to right, you can create a template basically starting with the edge of the road, the center line of the road, and then the other edge of the road. So you can pre-configure your template already.
Excellent. Thank you, Gustav. On the next screen here, we've also just shown you a little bit more detail and how instead of the codes you can show the point names and so forth.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gustav, did you want to go back?
Yeah, can we quickly just go back, Stefan?
Almost there.
Yeah, there we go. Just that next slide, please. Sorry, the next one. There we go. As you guys can see there, have a look at under your measure codes. You'll see that code called ditch. You'll see it's now, as I've mentioned, linked to number 7 on your keypad. So if you press 7, you activate that ditch code. And you'll also see that small little icon there. That's basically showing that there's a pre-configured template that you've created. So that is, for instance, a dedicated template that was now created for the road cross-section. And like I said, you capture it the same way. So basically, you'll either move from left to right, right to left of the road, or you can also pre-configure a zigzag-like, way of capturing the data. So that is just why there's an icon on the one and why there wasn't on the previous keys.
Excellent. Thank you, Gustav. I think the next one to show would be the background maps, and this is something I really enjoyed in the field when I still did field work, just to bring more context and to understand where certain things were going to fall, especially when you're staking out either roads or big layouts for developments. So these screenshots were taken off the technical tips that Trimble puts on their YouTube channel. I'd highly recommend for you guys to look for that. And they're now showcasing that you can use a web map service as a background map in your controller. And what this is if you find the right service, you can enter the URL and configure it, and then as you're working in the field, similar to turning your phone on and having Google Maps in the background, this will automatically stream the map tiles in the background for you depending on where you are working. So it's different to a georeferenced background image. This is a map service that's intelligent, and it'll only download the little tiles depending on where you work. So in this example, you can see this is a strange map. It's kind of like a street map, and how the tiles would build up. You can see in the bottom right corner over there, these tiles haven't been downloaded yet. I specifically paused the video on this section just to show you how the smart map service would download in the background. All right, then on the next slide, just to highlight that you can also use a georeferenced image, which could be anything. As long as there's a world file and it knows where it is, you can use that. So you can download a georeferenced image from a local provider, as long as the coordinate system is the same as your job. And there are even some websites where you can extract these georeferenced images. And because your TSE7 is a Windows 7 tablet or operating system, you can just browse to the internet and download it straight into your job files. All right, the next one, Gustav, maybe you can take us through this one, and it's the Snap2 toolbar.
Yeah, I think we all know the challenges in when you imported a CAD drawing onto your controller, DXF or DWG file formats. Sometimes it's a bit difficult when you need to snap off or create points from the CAD. One example in specific that I want to just quickly just explain to you is that let's say you've got a circle and you need to create a point of the center. You need to stake out the center of that circle. You can now go and you can select the circle and then make use of the snap to toolbars. And I'll go through the various options there shortly as to how to create the point or how to snap off the point and how to create that point to be able to stake it out. All right.
Yeah, and I think the need for this, as you can imagine, is you think that you've pre-calculated the right work for site, and as you get onto site, your client says, oh, can't you show me the intersection or halfway point or whatever? And this is now in line with why we're saying it's unlocking your true potential, because you can do that calc in the field. Might not be ideal if you're charging your client per hour because now you're so quick, but that's a problem you'd have to deal with.
Right, yeah, and yeah, so basically just going through the various functions that you've got in the Snap to Toolbar. So starting there on the left-hand side, there you can see the various options. I'm going to quickly just start with the Snap to Midpoint. So what you can do, you can now go and you can identify an element in your CAD drawing. For example, if it's a line or a straight line or it's a curve, what you can do, you can now go and you can highlight by simply touching on that specific element with your stylus or with your finger. You can now highlight that element, and then what you can do, you can make use of that snap to midpoint option. So when you select that and you make use of the snap to midpoint, it's going to create a temporary point there. And then what you can do then is you can create or make a point of that, which and assign a name and a code to it, and you will be able to go and stake it out. The next one is snap to end. Same thing, identify and highlight the element, and you can now go and select snap to end, and it's going to create the endpoint of that element. Snap to intersection. So you've got two options there, which is basically an apparent intersection, which is basically two lines that's not joining, but there is the potential of them joining. What you can do, you can select both lines and you can select snap to intersection, and it will create a temporary point there, which you can then convert into or create a permanent point of where they're actually intersecting. And then also your other option is where the lines are actually intersecting and you need that point. Same thing, you'll go and you'll identify the two elements, and then you can select the snap to intersection option. So you've got two options there, line that's joining and lines that's not joining. Next up is your snap to PI of arc. Again there, Stefan, if we can just highlight on that that arc there, you know, where that guys just go downwards. There we go, that one there. That's a good example there. So what you'll do, you'll highlight your arc, and then you can go and you can say snap to PI of arc, and it will calculate that PI for you. All right, snap to center. That is now where you can now go and you can select your arc or your circle, and you can select it and you can say snap to center, and it will create that center point there. Okay, and then snap to nearest is exactly what it is. You'll identify your line, and it will, where you've highlighted there, it will create a point that's closest to the line that you've selected. All right, yeah, so that's basically, in a summary, that's your snap to toolbar functions and the options that you have there.
Excellent. On this screen is just two screenshots showing an example again of snap to midpoint, which you can see the midpoint of the arc there. And on the other side, the snap to intersection, where it's actually created the intersection and the point there for you. So no need to rush back to the office, try and do the calc and come back to the field. You can actually do it while you're there. All right, let's look at the next one. And this is again something Gustav has got a lot of experience with. And Gustav, I'll hand over to you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, Stefan. Yeah, and I think we all know, again, especially the guys that's done some intensive construction works, and it's not limited to construction only. But I mean, sometimes if you have to work from drawings, it's really, really tricky. You know, you don't. There's, you know, the thing is, you need to make sure that you've got the right drawing for the right can I say, stage of the construction process. You might need, it's very tricky to get a bigger picture when doing construction work and construction surveys. So where this really is becomes quite handy is that you can now, and this is basically using the SX10 in this specific example, you can now start working with your IFC models. So basically what it is, it's an industry foundation classes, it's an industry standard file format, and it allows you to now import your IFC model onto your Trimble Access software. And then in this, like I've mentioned, in this specific example, we've used the SX10, and we actually imported the IFC model. It was georeferenced, and we've basically now viewed how the IFC model is actually now looking in the field. On the left-hand side, you can see the solid. This is actually the solid model, and then you can also have the option to just focus on the wireframe of that model. So Stefan, yeah, we can just jump to the next slide. So yeah, just some functionalities here. You can now go and you can review vertices, edges, and surface attributes from the map. The next feature is you can save points. You can create a point by physically going and snapping off the corners of let's say, of that specific warehouse. You can snap points off, create the point, and then go and stake it out. You can select and stake curved edges, compute center lines, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. Again, create points on the surface. And then lastly, you can measure to the surface data as well in the field and put it in your survey report. Thanks, Stefan. You can go to the next slide. So in this specific example, as I've mentioned, to create center lines, so when you're using your IFC model, you can now go and you can click on your element or a specific element of that model. It will highlight it. If it's got attribute data, you'll be able to see all the attribute data. So as you can see there, it's now picking up. The diameter is 0.984 meters. The total length of that section is 2.936 meters. And then all your attribute data will be listed below there. So what you can do now, Stefan, we can jump to the next slide, is you can select that feature or that element and you can compute the center line of that element. All right, so you will calculate it and you'll be able to go and you can actually now start staking out that center line. Okay, next slide. Also, by clicking on that surface, you'll be able to create points. So for that example, it's a little bit tricky in that specific element, but if you look thinking about, let's say, corners of columns, if you need to stake that out, it's as simple as going to the edges and snapping it off there, create points, and you'll be able to set those points out. So the nice thing is actually working with your model data so that you make sure that you don't make mistakes. And again, it's just a way of making the data more, to get more out of your data. This is, so it's quite an exciting feature, this. Okay, Stefan, we can go to the next slide. So as I've mentioned, the IFC with the SX10, you can now bring that IFC model to life, if I can call it like that. But you'll be able to now make measurements to this IFC model. You'll be able to, as I've mentioned, create points by simply and only using the model data there. But this is typically what you'll see if you're using an IFC model with your SX10.
Yeah, and I think this is an important part. This looks like a pretty picture, but what this actually is, and I don't know if everybody realizes it, but this is a screenshot taken off the TSE7 field controller, and it's basically overlaying the model with the video feed that's inside the SX10. So your model is appearing in mixed reality there. I mean, imagine staking out like that versus staking out on a clipboard and thinking, oh, what was the point number again, and then turning your total station to it. I just love how everything has become so visual. And when you have your client peering over your shoulder, it might be a good or a bad thing, but you can certainly give them answers and give them context.
Yeah, and Stefan, and I think also, it's important for everybody to be on the same page in terms of what is actually happening, where's the construction phase at. So yeah, it's just giving you as the surveyor in the field just that little bit of an edge to actually show your clients, okay, this is where we at. I mean, it's very tricky. I think we all know, just working from drawings, we all know how difficult it is at times. But yeah, this is just a way to just make it a little bit easier for you. That's how I would like to describe it.
Excellent.
What I just want to show you guys here, the scan data part. So if you've done the scan, this is again specific to the SX10 in this specific case, where if you've done a scan, you'll be able to switch your scans on with the IFC model. All your survey data will be on your screen. So you'll be able to see what you've done in your project. So yeah, this is just basically just showing you how it would look like. And you can switch on and off what you don't want to see. Right, yeah, there you can make measurements. So if you want to know what is the distance, you'll be able to actually record your measurements that you've made to the actual model. So yeah, this is basically just an explanation just to show you, okay, what are you actually able to do? But yeah, that's basically it on this slide. Yeah, and then viewing of your IFC model. What you can now do, you can make use of your different layers. You can now go visualize everything that the whole model, but you can also go, let's say you at the foundation pouring stage, what you can do, you can now go and you can switch off the layers that's not necessary and only focus on the specific, of the pouring of the concrete and putting out the center lines of the column positions. But yeah, this is basically just a slide explaining this whole process. All right, here, as I've mentioned, where you can now go and you can snap off points and be able to stake the points out. So you can now, in this specific example, take the column positions, you can go and you can snap off and create points of those four corners of that column block. And then on the next slide, Stefan, you can now go, you can switch off the, change from a solid to a wireframe. So there you can now also see what's happening inside the model. There you can see all the rebar. So what you'll be able to do now is to switch off the solid and then you can stake these positions out. So as you can see there on the right-hand side, that is now basically just the normal process of being able to stake out how far you from the exact position. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Gustav. That was a great overview. I'll take the next one, and it's something that I used when I was in the field, and this is to create tape distances in your Trimble Access job. So tape distances, what it is, when you're surveying perhaps a residential property for a detailed survey and you've got to capture the building footprint, and with your robotic total station, there's just some corners of the wall that you can't get to, but walls are generally fairly rectilinear with 90-degree angles, and this feature basically helps you fill in the missing detail. So what you can do is you can click, let me just turn the laser pointer on. So in this case, they've used that line as a baseline. So you select the 2 points, and then you simply have to hold your finger on the screen in which direction you want it to calculate it. It's going to use 90 degrees, and you simply just add the distance that you have to go for. So a very nice little feature. There might be a use for it in certain applications. All right, Gustav, you can talk to us about limit boxes, and this is a feature that I really love in Trimble Business Center and in Trimble RealWorks. And it's so exciting that this is now available in Trimble Access, because you'll know that in Trimble Access now, specifically with the TSE7, you can rotate the point cloud on your screen. So no longer are you forced to just view in 2 dimensions, but that's the little rotate button. And with the limit box, it's going to make it even easier to see what you want to see. Go
Yeah,
for it,
so
Gustav.
Stefan, yeah, so basically what's nice about, I think for most of our users in Trimble Business Center and Trimble RealWorks, they're quite familiar with the limit box function. But this is ultimately just taking your data, especially your point clouds and your IFC models, where you will now go and you will focus on a area of interest. So this is just a tool where you'll take your whole data set, your point cloud or your IFC model, and you'll make use of different sliders, and you will now go and you make it smaller to actually focus on the area of interest. So as you can see here, you've got three main toolbar buttons, which is, I'm going to start here on the right-hand side, the top option. So there's your top to bottom. So if you take your model, you can now reduce it from both sides, either top down by using those sliders. So you can now go and you can reduce them. The one below that, it's basically a left to right, okay? And the next one is a front to back. So as you can now see, you can now select the appropriate option that you want, and you can now go and you can make your point clouds or your IFC model smaller and only focus on an area of interest. Yeah, so yeah, as we've mentioned there, think about a parking parkade where you've got different levels, or a building with different levels, and you only want to focus on the, let's say in an example, on the first floor. You'll be able to now reduce your point cloud. Let's say you've done multiple scans, you will be able to now reduce your point cloud so that you only focus on the first floor. And it's very handy, especially if you need to pick up detail. Let's say it's a, you know, you went in with your SX10 and your TSE7 controller with Trimble Access, and you want to make sure that you've picked up and you've scanned enough data and you're focusing on your column positions and the building footprint. You can now use your limit box to only focus on the first floor, and you will be able to see if you've got sufficient data. So it's just a way of just making your data a little bit smaller and a little bit more manageable to make sure that you don't have to revisit your job site. What's also very handy here, as on the next slide, is you can, for example, you can now take your point cloud or your IFC model and you can apply a reference to it, so that you make sure that when you reducing your limit box from front to back, is that it is basically in line with your data. This is just a temporary reference or azimuth that you will apply, but this is just to make sure that you get the best out of your limit box sliders. Okay. And also, let's say you know specifically what is the limits that you want. You can now just simply double click on the main toolbar, either top to bottom, left to right, or front to back. You can now go double click on your vertical limit. This is now the top to bottom option, and you can go and you can key in what the top and the bottom and the center should be, and also what is the thickness of that. So in this specific example, as you guys can see now on the screen, this is now your point cloud data. So you can now go in your toolbar, go select the limit box option. Next slide, please, Stefan. So you can now use your top to bottom slider. As you can see, we've now used the bottom slider. You can now move it up, and also your left to right to reduce the point cloud to only focus on that specific elevation of this specific building.
Yeah, and I think it's just nice to hide the things that are in your way, so that you know, it's not cluttered on the screen as you're working in the field, and you can really focus on what you want to do there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, this is now where you go. You can, if you know what your vertical limits should be, you can now go and you can key in your limits, and you can apply it, and then it will now just focus on what you've keyed in. So it's just a little bit, if you're battling with the slider a little bit, especially, let's say your point cloud is not that high. Sometimes if you battle with the sliders, double clicking on it and keying in your vertical limits is going to sort your problem out.
Excellent. Thank you, Gustav. There's only 3 left that we want to show you guys, and these ones will go quite quickly. Let's start with the multi-staked one, or the mixed stakeout list here. And this is just one slide to show you that you can select the different elements in your active map and then add it to a stakeout list. In the past, if you've selected points and lines, then it was going to try and make an alignment for you. But now you can select them, and the order that you select them is the order that they appear in your stakeout list. And obviously, once you've finished staking out the point and it's within the tolerance that you set, it'll be removed off the list. So I used to use this as a nice task list for myself in the field. When you have your coffee at 10 o'clock in the morning, you'd select the points in the order that you want to stake it out and maybe a boundary line, and it'll add it to the stakeout list over there.
Yeah,
Right.
Stefan, if I can just make a comment there. Now, what's nice about it is that, as you guys can see there, it's a mixed stakeout items list. So it's not only if you go, you're not only limited to points. You can now add your polylines. You can add your points. So it doesn't really matter. You can add them all in there. If you know what it is exactly that you need to stake out, add it there, the mixed items, points and lines, and stake it out accordingly.
Excellent. All right. The next one we've got here is the fact that the TSC7 with Trimble Access is AR ready. And Gustav, I'll leave the next one or two, or just the slide up to you again to explain.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Trimble Sight Vision, but this is basically just augmented reality technology. But if you use Trimble Access with the TSC7 controller, with the Trimble R12i, you'll be able to now bring your data to life. So in this specific example is that you can now import your model. If it is, again, IFC, if it's a SketchUp model, you can bring this in and you can start to actually now visualize to see what's actually happening in the field. So what makes this a little bit different is that it needs to be used in as a solution together, but you'll be able to now import it. Let's say you want to construct a building, you'll be able to now have a look, go to the site within centimeter accuracy, because it's now linked to your coordinate system settings that you've preset in your Trimble Access job file, and you'll be able to now go and see what's happening on site. How does the building design look like? Is there any design clashes? So yeah, just in a summary, it's a very, very powerful solution, and also enables you to just make sure that you're getting the best out of your data in the field. And also just being able to collaborate with your client to show him we've got a design clash in this specific part. And also, as you guys can see here, this is more a GIS application for utilities. And it's not limited to GIS, but you can now go and take this data and you can actually show your clients, where the utilities are running on a specific site.
Yeah, and what makes it nice is it's not just on the controller. It's mixed reality, meaning that as you walk around the site with your GPS and look up or down or tilt the screen, you're going to see the different aspects of the design or the model as it lies in the field. Thank you, Gustav. There's only one more feature we'd like to show you guys in this section, and this is more for the cadastral land surveyors, and it's about that horrible thing of having to place points and check them from independent vectors or independent measurements, as the Land Survey Act and the regulations say. And Trimble Access now has a really, really amazing feature where it will divide the available satellites. We could never do this in the past because there was never enough satellites. But now the app would divide your satellites into 2 subsets, set A and set B. And it'll do that in an intelligent way where it doesn't just take satellites to the left of the sky and satellites to the right of the sky. It'll ensure that there's a good spread so that your PDOP is good. And you could then measure and initialize on the subset A satellites, measure your point, and then click on subset B of the satellites and check your point, and it'll reinitialize and only use those satellites. So this will then filter through in a report, and strictly speaking, you can argue this case and present it to the Surveyor General like that, but we might need to go with you the first time just to convince them that this is trustworthy. So on the next slide here on the screenshots, you'll see first of all there was a total of 23 satellites available. You can see on the left there with all of them. And then on the bottom of your satellite screen, so to get to this screen from Trimble Access, you just had to click on the satellites. Then there's a button that says, okay, use satellite vehicle set A, which it would then do. You can see it's reduced to 10 satellites. This is the list of satellites with the tick boxes, and it's initialized, as you can see, RTK. Then you'd measure your points, click back on the satellite icon and say now you want to be a part of set B of the satellites. In this case it's used 5. So I don't think these screenshots were all taken at exactly the same time, but nonetheless it's initialized with good accuracies on set B. You'll check your point and file it that way. Okay, and that concludes the section of the new features that we wanted to speak about. Next up, a small section about data sharing between the field and the office, which Gustav can take on. And then we're pretty much at the end of our time, and we can look at questions and answers.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Stefan. So guys, yeah, we all know how difficult it is sometimes, and also, you know, when you capture the data, you first need to drive to the office, download the data, and then maybe take the next project, upload your data again, and then continue to the next site. So what Trimble Sync Manager basically, it enables the field and the office personnel to basically now share data. So basically between field and office. So basically what you'll do, you can create a project in your Trimble Business Center, and you can make use of Trimble Sync Manager to upload the job file, and then the field crew can now download the data. If they've got internet connectivity, of course, they can now download the data, complete the job. They can then change the status that the job file was basically completed, and then send it back to the office. Office can download, and they can start with the drafting work. So it's just a way of just speeding up, you know, sharing the data between field and office, and not having to drive back to the office to get the job done and then collect the data for the next site. So this is just a way where you can now speed up the process of completing the job, uploading the job file. The drafts team can basically carry on in the office, and you can continue to the next site. So this is just basically how it's done. This is now just a screenshot from Trimble Business Center, where you will create your job. You'll upload all the files that's necessary. You'll send it to the field crew, and they can now just download it in the field and then carry on with the job file. So in short, it's just a way of speeding up the whole process of getting the data and completing the data in the office for your drafting team.
And I think this is a very underrated feature, and this feature is freely available to you if you've got a current maintenance subscription, you know, your yearly maintenance for the software. If that's current, then this feature is freely available to you. So please get hold of us to help you get hooked up on that if you aren't using it already. I mean, can you imagine a medium to large size survey firm where, you know, you can prepare the jobs in the office, and while the guys are on the field, the next job can be ready for them to go and stake out, or if it's a beacon relocation, the search data is already there, or if it's a detailed survey where they miss some gaps, you can send them a DXF outlining the areas that you want them to resurvey. All right, so that's that from our side. we quite enjoyed preparing this, and we're really enjoying working with Trimble Access. So I'd like to open it to you guys. If there's any questions, we can quickly, Gustav, scan through the chat box, and I'll scan through the registrations to see if there's anything significant we should mention.